Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade, Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. Welcome to the show, everybody. Today we are back to talking metabolism, and we're going to talk about a distinction that I think is very important, especially as we understand the different metabolic toggles. Now remember, I've come up with several frameworks that are my own. The metabolic toggles are one of them. We're going to be focusing on that today. So let's do a brief review of the metabolic toggle concept. And we usually talk about these toggles as 4 different toggles or 5 different toggles when you consider maintenance being a toggle. And so I call these toggles because I like to think about toggling between them. 1 minute you're on one, the next minute you switch to the other. You have these different metabolic states that you can access. Now, these terms that we're going to go over, because they might be new for some of you, are semantics in a sense. They're mainly descriptive. Although in my book, Next Level Metabolism, and in past podcasts and in my work on social media and blogs and YouTube and all these other places, I go into depth with these. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, you're new to my work, and you really want to deep dive into these metabolic toggles, I have past podcasts on them, but I also just released my new book, Next Level Metabolism. It is not a diet book, so please do not get that book if you're one of these people who are expecting meal plans and recipes and food lists and all that kind of stuff. I have told myself a long time ago I will never do that kind of work again. It is not useful from my point of view. It acts more like a crutch for most people, and it's not something I want to do. So I did not want to write another diet book because I don't believe that diet books really work. I really wanted to write a book that teaches you how to do this yourself. And of course, that was infused in all of my work in the past, but the diet book concepts got in the way, which is why I published Next Level Metabolism by myself, away from any publishers. So I had a pure work for all the professionals that I train, and I do offer certifications in this for professionals. So if you're new to me and you are a professional, go to my website, jadeteta.com, check out the advanced metabolic female certification that includes my course on the fundamentals, metabolic foundations, and the advanced female metabolism course. All of this work will be there, but the one-stop shop now is Next Level Metabolism. So definitely get that book if you are a serious health and fitness enthusiast or a professional who really wants to understand these toggles. So let's go through these toggles really quickly. The idea behind them starts with the eat less, exercise more, dieting mentality. Now, this is nothing wrong with this, really. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with any of these toggles. It's just that they have particular uses, and that's why this framework is very valuable for all of us. So eat less, exercise more is a toggle that both pushes down food while upregulating exercise and movement. And we make a distinction when we talk about these toggles between movement and exercise. If you are familiar with metabolism, you know that there are several different parts. One of the parts of the metabolism is the basal metabolic rate, usually used synonymously with resting energy expenditure. This is the amount of energy we burn at rest. This is not really under our conscious control on a day-to-day level, okay? Now, on top of this unconscious metabolic, basal metabolic rate, the amount we burn at rest, we have other aspects of metabolism. One is exercise-associated calorie burn. Scientists call this EAT for EAT for exercise associated thermogenesis. It's the amount of calories we burn through exercise. There's also the thermic effect of food, the amount of calories we use when we eat, digest, and absorb the calories that our body uses. They call that TEF, thermic effect of food. And then there's the calories we burn from just activities of daily living, fidgeting, walking from here to there, doing the laundry, doing the dishes, having sex, standing rather than sitting, taking flights of steps, parking further away, just all the movements that we do during the day. This is called non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And it is very different than exercise-associated thermogenesis. In fact, if you look at the contributions to total calorie burn throughout the day, scientists vary on this, but we say that the NEAT component, these activities of daily living, these just accidental ways of moving throughout the day, constitute about 15 to 20% of our total calorie burn, whereas exercise constitutes about 5%. So if we were going to choose, and exercise is showing this more, or evidence is showing this more and more, if we were going to choose to either do activities of daily living, be a mover rather than a sitter, versus an exerciser, it's better to be a mover than an exerciser. In other words, it's probably better for our health and our waistlines to move most of the day and not exercise versus sit most of the day and then go do exercise. Now, of course, we would want a little bit of both, but this makes the distinction that you want to keep in your mind between moving and exercising. So eat less, exercise more is one toggle that pushes calories down through eating less, trying to manage the fuel we take in, taking in less of it, and also moving more and exercising more. Now, there's nothing wrong with this toggle, but we talk about a lot this idea that the calorie gap, the gap between energy intake and output, the wider that gap gets, the more the metabolism registers this as a stress. The metabolism is really best perceived in my mind as a complicated biological thermostat. It is measuring the difference between intake and output and measuring that as a stress. Another way to think about it is as a complicated biological stress barometer. It's measuring the difference between calorie intake and output. It sees that as a stress, and the wider that gap gets, the more stress it is under. And the more stress the metabolism is under, the more it begins to compensate with increased hunger, increased cravings, down regulation of motivation, a slowed metabolic rate, energy levels plummet, sleep can become fragmented and more difficult, etc. So eat less, exercise more is what most people have done. I call this the dieting toggle. It is not problematic. In fact, it can be highly effective if being the operative word, it is used for very short periods of time. Now, most people don't use it for short periods of time. They try to use it for very long periods of time, and this is where we get in trouble. The metabolism can handle stress no problem when that stress is extreme and short-lived or very long and gentle. So anytime you take something like the eat less, exercise more approach, and you do it for very long periods of time, what you're doing is taking a rather extreme approach and forcing the metabolism to deal with it over a long period of time, and it does not do well with that. And so when it comes to eat less, exercise more, what you want to be thinking about is doing that for short periods of time. So that's one toggle. Everyone's familiar with that particular toggle. Now, another toggle is the opposite of that, what we would call the couch potato toggle, which is essentially saying you're going to eat a lot and not move or exercise much. Now, again, that still creates a calorie gap. It just does so in the opposite direction, and that is also a stress on the physiology. And so many people live in this stressful state for very long periods of time as well. And one of the things I always say is that if you want to know how both of these work and why they're both a stress to the physiology, is because both dieters, people doing eat less, exercise more, and couch potatoes, people doing eat more, exercise less, are suffering from what? They're suffering from hunger, cravings, and fragmented sleep and decreased energy, what I would call hunger, energy, and cravings, HEC, H-E-C, or SHMEC, S-H-M-E-C, sleep, hunger, mood, energy, and cravings. I oftentimes talk about if you want to know the stress you're putting on your metabolic stress barometer, You can do so by looking at biofeedback, hunger, energy, and cravings, or sleep, hunger, mood, energy, and cravings, heck and schmeck. When heck and schmeck go out of check, you are putting stress on that physiological stress barometer. So those are two metabolic toggles. Nothing is wrong with either one of them. It's just that most people use them and only them for way too long. And in fact, bounce back and forth between the two, which is not a very healthy or effective thing to do. These two toggles should be used for short periods of time. Eat less, exercise more, 7 to 14 days, no longer than 4 weeks really. And eat more, exercise less, 4 to 7 days at the longest, in my clinical opinion, and based on doing this with thousands and thousands of clients. Now, the other two toggles that are more useful and less stressful because they shut down that calorie gap are what I would call eat less, exercise less, and eat more, exercise more. Eat less, exercise less is best conceptualized by traditional European lifestyles and hunter-gatherer lifestyles. These people are moving a lot. They're not doing a lot or at all of any structured exercise. They're not out there swinging kettlebells and running marathons and doing all this stuff, but they are moving an awful lot. In the case of hunter-gatherers, hunter-gatherer females are covering about 12,000 steps per day, and men are covering almost 19,000 steps per day at the ones that we look at, Shamani, the Shamani tribes, what are the other ones that Herman Ponzer studies? Anyway, we have Aboriginal tribes, the Hadza tribes. We've looked at these tribes. We know about how much activity they're doing, and it seems to be pretty consistent across these different traditional populations. They're not doing a whole lot of exercise. They do go on hunts on occasion. They do have some bursts of activity, but mostly they're just moving like crazy. And of course, living in natural settings, they're not able to really take in that many calories. So this is the eat less, exercise less model. If it's more to your liking, think about the elderly Parisian male or female who walks up and down their 4 flights to get to their apartment in Paris and goes to the farmer's market and walks around all day and eats relatively sparingly. So eat less, exercise less is a very effective weight loss, fat loss protocol. And because it's very gentle and has that very narrow calorie gap, it is really useful because it can be lived in indefinitely for a lot of people. And it's a toggle that you could always come back to. Now, the eat more, exercise more toggle is best thought of as the athlete toggle. These are the people who are moving a ton, and in order to fuel that exercise, they need to also bump up their calorie intake. This is eat more, exercise more. Again, eat less, exercise less, and eat more, exercise more. Narrow that calorie gap. Now, if you're paying close attention, you'll understand the semantics here. Is it possible that you could create a calorie deficit in both of these protocols? Absolutely, right? The eat less, exercise less, and the eat more, exercise more is more of a descriptive term, but certainly we can get down to really tracking calories and tracking macros and making this a slight deficit. The difference is, rather than 20%, 30% calorie deficits or 50% calorie deficits that you might find in eat less, exercise more, which would be 500 to 1,000 calorie deficits, in eat more, exercise more, and eat less, exercise less, it's more like 250, 300 calorie deficits, maybe up to 500, but that's getting into the more extreme levels. So the calorie deficit is more gentle in these. Sorry to break into the show, but I wanted to take a second to cover one of our sponsors and tell you all about Paleo Valley at paleovalley.com. These are the grass-fed sticks that I tell you all so much about, that all of my friends know I have on hand constantly. They are in my car. They are at my house. I keep them at my sister's home and my parents' house. I have these things everywhere because they are the simplest, most convenient whole foods protein supplement you can get. Almost like carrying around pure protein, low-carb protein in your pocket. They also, these Paleo Valley beef sticks, are the only 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef sticks on the market. They use organic spices. They are naturally fermented instead of using nitrates and nitrites that can be a problem in some of these cured meats, and they simply taste fantastic. Check out the original or the jalapeno. Those are my favorites. Please make sure you go over to paleovalley.com and visit. When checking out, use the code NEXTLEVEL for a 15% discount. Remember, our sponsors keep the show going by you giving them your patronage and spending your money on these high quality products. You actually do a few things. One, you're helping to support the podcast. And two, you are helping your health. And three, you are making sure that good quality companies like Paleo Valley can be out there doing their business, changing the world, making the earth better. One of the things you may not know about this is that grass-fed organic and grass-finished beef is doing something that is so utterly important for our environment, actually helping to repopulate the topsoil. A lot of people don't know this, but our topsoil is being extremely depleted, and raising animals, especially cattle, the correct way helps to get that topsoil back. This is one of the reasons why I love Paleo Valley. Not to mention it tastes fantastic, but they're one of these companies, like my other sponsors, Cured Nutrition and Organifi, that are doing the right things by the environment. I really appreciate everything they do, and I hope you will check them out. Thanks so much. PaleoValley.com. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. And now, back to the show. Now, with Eat Less, Exercise Less, the calorie deficit is mainly coming from decreased food intake. And with Eat More, Exercise More, the exercise is helping things along a little bit. But if you're paying close attention, Eat More, Exercise More can also be a toggle that you can use to create calorie surplus. Remember, just as you need a calorie deficit to create weight loss / fat loss, you need calorie surplus to put on lean muscle mass. And so this is an important consideration. So that covers the 4 toggles. So you might say, well, Jade, you said there's 5. The 5th one is maintenance, an isocaloric level, where there is no calorie gap at all. I would call this ESES, or Eat Some, Exercise Some. Now, in my book and in these past podcasts I've done and in my work elsewhere, you can find very specifically how I calculate macros and calories for all these different protocols. Now, I'm not going to do that in this podcast. I want to focus on this podcast on a more intuitive way to look at this, a framework that will be useful for you if you're a serious fitness enthusiast, but also will be useful to the many doctors and physicians and coaches and nutritionists, etc., who follow this podcast for work with their own clients. And that is this idea of teaching people to be tasters rather than eaters, and movers rather than exercisers. These distinctions are hugely important when we are conveying complex processes to the average person. Not just that, but it's very useful for us as individuals on our health and fitness journey to get very clear on these distinctions. So, Eat Less, Exercise Less is really a tasting and a moving type of protocol, whereas Eat More, Exercise More would be more of an exercising and an eating protocol. So let's talk about what we mean by this. Now, tasting to me is when you are not eating a full meal. It is a snack, but even less than that, it's more conceptualized in bites. You're tasting the food for satisfaction purposes. You're not eating the food for satiation purposes. And this is how I make that distinction. When you're eating for caloric value, you're eating for nutritional intake, and you're eating for satiation. So eating is about getting the calories and fuel in, getting the nutrients you need, and also satiating you, taking hunger away. Tasting, in my mind, is really about flavors and cravings. It's really about not necessarily eating for fuel or eating for nutrition or eating to satiate. It's eating for satisfaction. It's eating for tasting. It's eating or snacking or tasting for the flavors. And that's why I'm making this distinction. Eating for fuel, for nutrients, for satiation. Tasting for satisfaction, for cravings, for enjoyment. And so what this would look like is if I have a meal, let's say, I can both eat and taste at that meal. Let's say this meal has steak, it has potato, it has wine, it has broccoli, it has salad, it has some cheese, it has some dessert. Now within this, you're going to look at this and say, where are my big nutrient dense, calorie sparse, satiating forms of intake here? Well, obviously the steak is loaded with nutrition. Depending on the type of steak, it's going to be fairly lean. The broccoli, the salad, these are going to be things that are going to be very nutrient dense, very satiating as well because of the water and insoluble fiber and soluble fiber in these vegetables. And so you would probably eat the steak and the vegetables. I oftentimes like to say you want to eat the protein and the fiber and the water-rich things, the things that will satiate you and the things that tend to have lots of nutrients in them and tend not to be that calorie dense, and even when they are calorie dense, they tend to fill us up so we don't overeat, and so calories take care of themselves. Now, when we look at the other stuff on this plate, the dessert and the wine, these are probably going to be the things that we're wanting to taste. 1 glass of wine, 3 to 5 polite bites of dessert. Polite meaning small. Maybe the cheese, based on your sensitivities, and the potato are also things that you would taste. And so you see here that tasting is individualized in a sense, but we definitely want to be eating the things that are nutrient dense, water rich, and protein dense with good fats, things that satiate, give us nutrition, and provide us fuel. This is what we want to be doing. We also could look at this throughout the day, can't we? We can essentially say, I might eat my breakfast of, scrambled eggs with some egg whites and egg yolks in there, and, a little bit of blueberry, and maybe some Canadian bacon or something like that. Those are things that will be satiating, low in calorie, nutrient dense. But then maybe I want to taste my latte with sugar in it and taste the croissant that's on the side, right? That I wouldn't necessarily eat those. There would be those things being left. And this is usually what tasting means. It means if I have a pastry with that very nutritious, otherwise nutritious breakfast, that pastry is going to only be a third of it will be gone because I only tasted it. I did not eat it. Eating means I'm eating the whole pastry. Tasting means I am having a little bit and then putting it aside maybe to taste tomorrow or to taste later. This is the way you want to be thinking about this. So eat less, exercise less is a tasting. You're doing lots of tasting and you're eating only the things that provide satiation and nutrition and the calories necessary to live without creating hunger, energy, and cravings, and sleep, hunger, mood, energy, and cravings going out of control. So it's one way to take the eat less, exercise less concept and teach it to yourselves and others. Be a taster with certain types of food. Be an eater of other types. So when it comes to the types of food to eat, you want to eat low calorie, low fat, low starch, low sugar, soup, salad, scramble, shakes, and stir fries. I talk about these a lot. These would be lean protein sources, good fat sources, lots of fruits and vegetables. You're going to eat those things. What you are not going to eat are high combinations of salt, sugar, fat, alcohol, and starch. These things are going to be more calorie dense, less satiating, but we do want some of them for the satisfaction effects. At the same time, we want to be a mover rather than an exerciser in eat less, exercise less. It doesn't mean you can't exercise, but it means you want to limit your exercise. And this goes to research on the idea that exercise does not do well for the vast majority of people as a weight loss reducing benefit. I highlight this all the time in a recent study, the alpha and beta trials on postmenopausal women, where they took 3 different groups of women and had them exercise doing jogging 30, 45, or 60 minutes, 5 days per week over the course of a year. And what they found is that 75% of those women did not lose weight, and a quarter of them actually, or a third of them actually ended up gaining weight as a result of the exercise. Only 25% of those women in the alpha and beta trial actually lost weight due to this exercise regime. And part of the reason was it causes increased hunger, which compensated for the energy burned with the exercise. And so this is why these distinctions are important. Eat less, exercise less. You want to move a lot. Exercise just enough. I usually set the exercise limit to 3 times per week when looking at the eat less, exercise less, or this tasting and moving protocol. Very important. And so in a sense, for beginners to this lifestyle, you want to teach them to be movers rather than sitters. Not teach them to go from sitting to exercising, because oftentimes that's going to be too stressful and they will overcompensate with eating. So the right trajectory is get them to be movers rather than sitters, and then slowly, if they want, and as they condition themselves and want to move into eat more, exercise more, or even dip their toe in the water of eat less, exercise more on occasion, then you can add the exercise in. But the best approach for beginners is to get them to stop being sitters, make them movers, and just have them dip their toe in exercise. So there is a real continuum here. Movers rather than sitters, then exercisers. Not moving to exercising. You do not want to take a couch potato and try to make them a cross-fitting paleo man, as I oftentimes like to say. That's not the right approach for most people. And as a coach, or as us working on our own health and fitness, this is going to be the wrong approach. It's going to cause more trouble than it is worth. And so these distinctions matter and make it pretty easy for people to understand. Understanding that eating is about hunger suppression, taking care of the hunger aspect of heck, and tasting is about the satisfaction or craving aspect of heck. Teach them about what they should be eating for hunger and what they should be tasting for cravings. This is critical. Now, when you move into the eat more, exercise more approach, now we're going from a mover to an exerciser, and rather than tasting, we're going into more eating. This is an important distinction because at this point, a lot of people get in trouble because they still think we should be avoiding certain types of foods. But when you're now exercising like crazy, many athletes cannot get the calories they need to drive their performance and even weight loss when they are eating nothing but healthy foods. Think about it. When we're eating nothing but lean, clean protein sources with not a lot of fat and not a lot of starch and nothing but lots of vegetables, then what ends up happening is that calorie gap can then become rather large, and we're inadvertently putting them into an eat less, exercise more state, which again, nothing's wrong with that, but if we inadvertently put someone in that state for too long, we create problems. And you're seeing a lot of this with people who are on keto type diets. And by the way, just because you're on keto doesn't necessarily mean you'll be in a calorie deficit. Plenty of people can reach isocaloric states and even hypercaloric states on keto. But there are many people who go on some of these diets like intermittent fasting and keto type diets who are exercising an awful lot and inadvertently putting themselves into long-term eat less, exercise more approaches. Some of you have been asking me of late about clients who have been struggling with this, and we've had discussions about the idea that for some of these people, you're going to need to make sure they're getting the fat and the starch and even some of the junk foods on occasion to get their caloric intake up. Remember, the body tells you the appropriateness of a diet, not your perspective on what that diet is. I oftentimes talk about this idea. If you are starving and haven't had food for 3 weeks, and I give you a candy bar and a Big Mac, those foods at that point become nutritive and health foods under that context. Of course, if you're eating 4,000 calories a day or 5,000 calories a day, even if I give you broccoli and asparagus at the end of the day, they're not going to do you any favors. They're just adding to that calorie burden. So we do need to look at this in context. Someone who is crushing it in CrossFit or triathlons or any of these things may indeed require some foods that we might deem unhealthy in a different context. And this is important to understand. And this is why having this new distinction or this way of looking at things of, sitters, movers, exercisers, and then this idea of tasters and eaters is very helpful in helping people make these mindset shifts and make these things more of a lifestyle for themselves as they move forward for these, for their health and fitness goals. And so I'm going to end right there. I wanted to just express this idea because it's been coming up a lot. We also haven't talked about metabolism for a bit on this podcast, but I wanted to do a brief review of the metabolic toggles for those of you who have not heard it. It also is in the new book, Next Level Metabolism, so please check that out. But also just remember, that book is not for you all who are looking for diet books. It's for you all who really want the deep, in-depth science all in one place of the stuff I talk about here as it pertains to metabolism. These metabolic toggles, I think, are incredibly important to understand and know how to work with yourself if you're an individual fitness enthusiast, and with your clients. And these distinctions about teaching people when to taste versus eat and when to move versus exercise are very important as well. All right, everybody, I will see you at the next podcast. Thanks for hanging out, and until next time.